Well, a very good evening to you and welcome to this KATV Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Chris May. This week we've opened our studio to the candidates for governor of Arkansas to discuss one of the critical issues confronting our state, how to build and maintain a world-class system of education for our children. On Monday night, you heard from the state's Attorney General, Leslie Rutledge, who was seeking the nomination of the Republican Party. Tonight, we will hear from the Democrats. They include, from left to right on your screen now, James Russell, Dr. Anthony Bland, and Dr. Chris Jones. Their primary opponent, Supa Cypress Mays, agreed to participate tonight, but due to a scheduling conflict, she is unable to join us. Now, these candidates will be fielding questions from our viewers, from me, and from this man, the host of Talk Business and Politics, Roby Brock. Roby, great to be with you again tonight.
You too, Chris.
Should be another interesting town hall. Each of these candidates will have 2 minutes to speak directly to the voters of Arkansas. And Mr. Russell, we will begin with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Chris and Roby. Good to speak with you in person finally. Want to thank the studio for taking such good care of us in observing COVID restrictions and making sure we're socially distant as well. Talking on the issue of education in our state is critical, not simply for a matter of children's welfare and everything else, but our freedom is predicated on our ability to be educated. A free society is fundamentally reliant upon being educated. You can't make choices that you're not aware exist. So really, to build the foundation of the freedom and get our state back on track, we have to knuckle down on education as not simply K through 12, as we'll discuss, or higher ed, but as a lifelong journey of fruition as people, as empowering and giving opportunity to all, and making sure that it's a level playing field.
Okay, Mr. Russell, thanks so much. Dr. Bland, to you.
All right, first, thank you, Russ. Thank you, Roby, Chris, Dr. Jones. Hey, I'm so glad to be here with all of you to share with you about education and the emergency need for education with all of our students. As an educator, I see it on a daily basis of why we need a stable foundation in our educational system. And so tonight I'm excited and thrilled about being here with all of you to speak about education and also to talk before the voters, to let them know that we're here to represent them, to let them know that we're here to stand no matter what the obstacle may be, whatever we need to do to make sure the people are represented the way they should be, not having a dictator government, but a democracy. And that's what we're here for.
Okay, Dr. Bland, thank you so much. Dr. Jones, the floor is yours.
Ms. Watson, my third grade teacher at LL believed in my dream of reaching for the stars. Ms. Work, my civics teacher at Watson Chapel, she reminded me that truth and facts matter. Charlie Spizzato, the principal for my 1 year of teaching in high school, he assured me that the tough moments would either diminish me or enhance me, and it was up to me to decide. The two most important teachers of my life, my dad and my mom, who's a lifelong educator, live a life of love and service to all that I pray I live up to. I've been blessed with outstanding, phenomenal educators who have pulled me towards opportunity. I've been fortunate to receive the benefits of public education, and I am enormously thankful for the scholarship that I received to college from NASA. I would not be sitting here today if not for the people, the systems, and the supports that surrounded me. What if every child in Arkansas had those supports? What if, regardless of zip code, every family had access to pre-K? Every community had affordable, high-speed broadband. All third graders could read, and every student that graduated had a plan for higher ed or career. What would Arkansas look like if that happened? We're at the bottom of every indicator in education, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose a different future. We can reimagine our education system. Now, to do that, it's not rocket science. We can tackle the hard problems and grab the opportunities that are before us. All it takes is grit and working together. Arkansas, we have the grit. Now we just have to work together. And not like a house divided, but as one team and one Arkansas. so that we can lift ourselves to the leadership position in education. And we need to do this for our children's children. So I believe that we can do it because I have faith in Arkansas. I believe that we must do it because it's about time. So thank you, Roby. Thank you, Chris, for having us here. Thank you to my colleagues. I look forward to this conversation because it's very important to me.
Okay, right. Dr. Jones, our thanks to you as well. We'll begin our question and answer period now. Roby, why don't you start us off?
All right, since Mr. Russell went first, I'm going to come to Dr. Bland for the first answer on this, then we'll go to Dr. Jones, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Russell. A record-tying 201 Arkansas school districts have COVID-19 infection rates of 50 or more new known infections per 10,000 residents in those school districts. This is new information that just came out today from the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement. Should schools be open during this COVID-19 surge that we're in right now? And what would you do differently as governor, if you were governor today, than what Governor Hutchinson is doing on schools?
Well, first and foremost, I know that I will put the people first. So developing policies or laws that actually will prevent the health and safety of the people in our state will never be the case with me as governor. I would never have signed a bill to prevent masking. For that was there just to help prevent the spread of COVID. If I was governor, I would make sure that our children in those schools were safe, secure, and stayed healthy and strong. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you actually maintain and monitored the levels of COVID. I would not hide what's going on within our communities or in our schools. If there are students that are catching COVID, I don't want that to be something that I hide from the public. I want our children to be safe. And the only way that we can maintain safety and security for all of our communities is to be transparent and to be accountable for the people that we serve. And so that's what I would do.
Schools be open or closed right now?
If it was up to me, if it got to the point that it was going to prevent the safety of our children, I would suggest closing schools until we could be safe.
All right. Dr. Jones, should schools be open now in the face of this COVID surge? And what would you do differently with schools and COVID-19 than Governor Hutchinson?
Yeah, Roby, that's a tough, challenging question. More so because of the situation that we're in and we're dealing with. The report that just came out today, as you mentioned, talked about us being in a raging fire situation. And in those situations, you really have to do everything you can to protect the most vulnerable. Now, I do think that there are things that we can do, like masking and increasing our vaccination rate, that will allow us to be in person. In-person schooling is ideal for most kids, not for all kids, but for most kids. So I think there are steps that we can take before we get to the point that we have to shut down. But when you look at the numbers, I would certainly not take that off the table.
All right. Mr. Russell?
Kind of off of what Dr. Jones was talking about, it should be on the table, but it shouldn't be a blanket decision. Just as Arkansas isn't the same as everywhere else in the nation, different populations, that needs to be an individual choice. The core problem of what we saw with the bill that was passed and the law was put into place is that it stripped away the ability for the local municipalities and local school boards to make that determination based on current scientific data. And you can't institute a blanket policy when you've got individuals to actually deal with. So we needed something that would still allow that freedom, that flexibility to react to a raging fire and evolving situation, especially when you're dealing with an epidemic or a viral outbreak. Now, a year ago when we saw the initial wave of COVID, you had a R factor of about 1, so the infectious rate wasn't as bad. Now with the Delta variant, you're seeing something more akin to even the 7 to 8 range, depending on which guidelines you're going off of. That's a much higher rate of infectivity, so you're now playing with an entirely different organism, a different deal. So you have to enable people to protect themselves on an individual basis as needed, as suits those needs. That may mean that one thing's different from Little Rock than it is from Pine Bluff, than it is from Harrison, than it is from Ash Flat. but they need to be able to make those decisions based on what the numbers are there so that they can stop and contain that spread and thus enable and protect the rest of our community as a whole.
Push for more local control is what you're telling me.
More local control and more transparency with the facts. And also, if you're going to put a mandate in place, like if a school board is going to put something in place, it has to actually have enforceability behind it. Even when we did have mask orders issued previously, we had law enforcement officers who were saying, I'm not going to enforce it.
Right.
Then if it's a law with no enforcement, it's no law at all. You actually have to have some force behind it.
So let's talk a little bit about masks. As long as schools remain open, the focus is on keeping teachers and students safe. But it is now the law in Arkansas that mask mandates can't be enforced, even though a judge has put it on hold. A lot of Arkansans out there believe that masks should be an individual choice. Would you, as governor, work toward a future in which mask mandates return to Arkansas? And if you had the power, would you impose them on all school districts, regardless of what parents may say about it? Dr. Jones, we'll start with you.
Yeah, appreciate that question, Chris. If I were governor and the power existed in the governor's office, I certainly would do it. When I think about the situation that we're in, I drop my girls off at school every day, and they wear their mask. And every day I get concerned about what's happening during that school day. And also my wife is an ER doc, so she sees the impact of COVID ravaging through our communities. We have to do things to keep the most vulnerable in our community safe. And as governor, I certainly would do everything I could.
Okay, Mr. Russell?
Again, same thing. It's enabling the local municipalities to enforce, but it certainly is a matter of putting a rule in place where, yes, there is a mandate. If things are exploding, it is the role of the government to protect and serve the public trust. That's inherent. That's why we have fire departments, police departments, everything else. It is to promote public safety and welfare. And again, protecting the most vulnerable among us. Teaching in school, that's fundamentally putting Dr. Bland at risk. The ER doc and dropping the daughters off at school. My own niece is in school here in Little Rock. All of them masking up. But it's protect the children, and it's also looking at, again, you look at the virology behind it, the spread that can happen. So it's not just about that initial potential contaminant, it's looking at how much risk is there for spread. And if something as simple as a mask can prevent that transmissibility, then it should be a no-brainer. That should almost be a moral obligation to one another as citizens in a common cause.
Okay, Dr. Bland, your thoughts?
All right. Well, I look at it as this: alpha to delta is one thought, but then let's call it what it is. We have alpha to approximately lambda now. So you're talking about 11 various variations of this virus, and it's constantly mutating. So my question would be to the people, a mask or a life? So in my mind as governor, I would say, well, I'm here to help serve and protect the people of our state. So I would definitely sign for those people to mask up and protect all people in our communities. To not wear a mask is just, it's like saying I don't want to protect the people that I love dearly. If that's going to prevent me from spreading the virus, then that's a no-brainer. Yes, I would recommend to wear a mask.
Did you have a thought?
Yeah, I want to follow up because I appreciate what Russ and Anthony are saying, and let's talk about the elephant in the room. We don't have to be in this situation. There were folks who made political decisions to strip away the power of schools to require mask mandates. Look, when I drive to school, sometimes I'm in a hurry and I get behind a school bus, but every time that school bus stops and the stop sign comes out, I stop, regardless of how inconvenient it makes me. Why? Because I believe in protecting and keeping the most vulnerable safe. That's what we have to do.
It seems like, though, for a lot of Arkansans, the question is about the role of government and the authority of government. Do you believe that to keep these students safe that there has to be a mask mandate, or are people armed with the knowledge that they have after 18 months of COVID? Are they equipped to do it on their own? It's the role of government is the question. Mr. Russell?
Considering the levels of COVID we're still seeing and the levels of mask wearing, I'd say obviously not. And if people are having such a callous disregard for their fellow citizen, then it is absolutely the role of government to protect the vulnerable among us from those who would do harm, whether through negligence or anything else. I mean, yes, we allow firearms. We don't allow you to fire at random in a neighborhood. If you picture those bullets as, viral particles, it's the same basic principle. The government has a duty to protect your neighbors from your potential misbehaviors and any harm that may come from your actions. So yes, there's a role in fundamentally protecting one another as a society. And that's not draconian, that's just beneficent.
You want to get the last word on this?
Absolutely. I would say, if the mask is going to protect a life, every life saved is a no-brainer. Why is mask such an issue when it could save a life? One mask that's, if you find the right store, that's 99 cents, could save a life that lives right now around about 70 to 80 years old. 70 to 80 years for a 99-cent mask should not be an issue.
All right, I guess I'm going to go to Dr. Jones. I think I've lost my musical chair there. So, all right, I'll start with Mr. Russell then. We have had, as Chris mentioned, 18 months of COVID-19 here in Arkansas. It has set a lot of school children back. Particularly last year, there were a lot of places that were not prepared to go virtual. We read a lot and have seen a lot in statistics versus whether it's test scores or whether it's just mental health experts have said these kids have slipped in the past year. What would you do as governor, all three of you, what would you do as governor to help make up the ground that has been lost because of this last 18 months of COVID-19? How do you get kids back not only into the rhythm but get them accelerating from where they were?
I think it's a question of not just the kids, but society as a whole. I mean, effectively what's happened is you've had the entire society traumatized by a year of disruption. Now, while that is horrifying, and again, was easily preventable by simple measures, it also brought to the forefront all of the problems and failings that we had in our society and institutions. So we do have the chance now with COVID, rather than going back to, we hear the word all the time, wanting to get back to normal. We have the opportunity to address the fact that for millions of people, normal sucked. And pardon my language, but it just did. And we have the chance to build back better. So we do have the chance to go back in and ensure access to mental health care when needed in schools. We do have the chance to make sure that they have access to broadband in rural areas, down in the Delta. You take a look at the numbers that we just got recently for the redistricting off the census data. There's massive shifts in population that we have to actually account for and make sure that nobody gets left behind in those areas. So,
Dr. Bland?
All right. Well, I think as an educator, we have to meet our students where they are. Every student, one size doesn't fit all. So going into the classroom, each student needs to be met where they are. Trying to put students in classrooms and they're not prepared, they're not ready for the various curriculums that we're teaching, it's causing our students to get behind. And so that's where our state is. And to be honest with you, it was before COVID. We weren't where we needed to be. If you're looking at the statistical data, we're trying to blame it on COVID. No, our state has been a C average state for a while now. And so I'm just saying this, if you want things to change, you have to meet those students where they are. Smaller class sizes, supporting the teachers in the classroom. The teachers we're having to fight over salaries for teachers. You're having to fight over health care for teachers. You're having to fight over health care for students. There was a time the students, they were talking about taking away our kids from students, from kids. When did it come to a point that we stop forgetting about the people we serve? And so in education, the students, the administrators, the educators, they should be the ones that come first. But our government officials, I agree with my colleagues here, they made the decisions to not put the students, the educators, and the administrators and all the people that are in education first. Instead, they wanted to help their friends stay in a position when they had no idea whatsoever what it was about education. They didn't even have an educational degree. Just wanted to put that bug out there in the atmosphere. But at this point, if you want to really help our students and educators, we need to support them where they are. Students can only learn if you find out what it is they're lacking. Test scores, some students are great at taking written test scores. Some students are great doing virtual test scores. Just depends on the student. One size doesn't fit all. So I believe that we need to come up with a system, a curriculum to meet the students where they are, and actually get educators involved on creating this system and curriculum, and not the people that just want to keep millions of dollars in their pocket.
Dr. Jones, what's the solution to help, in your estimation as governor, to helping these children that are behind not only get caught up, but get ahead?
Yeah, Roby, thank you for that question. I'm an engineer, and so part of the way I think about things is try to get at root cause problems, the root cause of the problem. When we went through COVID last year, I was running the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub, and digital equity was one of the core problems. And so the way we went about addressing that, there's broadband access, there's technology access, and then there's understanding how to use that technology for your benefit. So we went across the state and in multiple languages provided digital literacy. I think there are ways that we can begin to address root causes of things, as was mentioned already, that have been existing for a long time, but COVID only shined a light on it. And what we're seeing is that the gap is widening. And unless we begin to address some of those core issues, it'll continue to widen.
There's a lot of investment in broadband going on right now. We're seeing a lot of the COVID-19 relief money go into there. It's just going to take a while. That's not something you install overnight. But I mean, is that the solution? What else beyond broadband expansion?
It is a solution. Beyond that, you also need digital literacy. Because again, folks do not know how to use all the technology, and it's understandable. We also need social emotional supports for the classroom. One of the things that we've been doing, I cannot hear out of my right ear. And so part of what I have to do is listen, and I lean into listening. So we've been having sessions with parents and with educators and with students to begin to unpack it. And I'll tell you, the ideas that have come out of that are fascinating and phenomenal. So
you can slip one in right now if you want to. So.
So one student said that they take a class to teach you how to understand various learning styles, right? So we all have different learning styles. Some in person, some do better visually. They take a class to unpack how people learn, they figure out how they learn, and then what happens is they gain more empathy for others. And when we have empathy for others, I tell you, our society will take off.
There was an announcement on Monday in the city of New York that all school staff there must be vaccinated against COVID-19. Should educators, teachers, school staff in Arkansas be required to take the COVID vaccine? Dr. Bland, we'll start with you.
Well, I do feel like, like I said earlier, I don't want to take away from a democracy. We're not a dictatorship. So I do believe that people should maintain their sense of choice when it comes to whether or not they should be able to take various avenues or paths. So with the vaccination, I do believe if you do not take the vaccination, then stop complaining about the mask. If you do, it's like everything that we try to do to prevent the spread, you have a complaint about it. But instead of doing something to prevent it, you want to complain about the prevention methods. So if it means vaccinating, go get vaccinated. If you don't want to vaccinate, put on a mask. If you don't like that and you don't like quarantining, that's the other problem. We need to have everything open. Really, everything that you're talking about preventing, you have a problem with. So my question is, once again, either do the prevention methods or the latter, which is no longer be in existence because of a virus.
But you would not require it as governor. Dr. Jones, would you require teachers in Arkansas to be vaccinated were you governor of Arkansas?
Yes. And here's why. Look, my wife and I were scrambling just this week because my daughter plays volleyball. And one of the things that you have to do, and we've always had to do it, is turn in your vaccine card. If you don't turn in your vaccine card, you can't play. In Arkansas, we already require 10 vaccines. you have to have them. The only difference between the first 10 and number 11 is politics. That's it. So absolutely we do it.
Okay. Mr. Russell?
I mean, he nailed it. No, I absolutely would require it for the exact same reasons. I mean, again, it's for protection. Now, would there be exceptions for the immunocompromised or something like that? Sure. Again, given the individual choice to the local school boards or whatever. But if an individual chooses not to and doesn't want a mask, like we're talking, if they don't want to take the basic precautions, then they can look at teaching from a virtual environment where they are not one-on-one with someone. There's a precaution that could be made. However, take the vaccine. That's definite.
Okay, so the extent of the consequences then for not being vaccinated in your administration would be virtual teaching only.
Yes, you would have to make allowances to ensure that you are not fundamentally endangering the people who you are put in charge of as a teacher.
But you would not be firing teachers who decline to get vaccinated.
No.
Would you fire teachers who decline to get vaccinated? What would be the consequence?
You know, there are already mechanisms in place. And I think those mechanisms vary. I can't say specifically what the consequences will be at the time. I think it depends on the situation. But certainly the requirement would be to have the vaccine.
Okay.
I say we go to a commercial break.
Okay, you want to do it?
I'm ready to go to some K through 12.
We will do that. We're already
So-
half an hour in. The
Yeah.
time definitely flies. Gentlemen, thank you. We will take a quick break, but there's much more ahead. When we come back, we'll discuss K through 12 education in Arkansas and what it might look like with one of these three candidates calling the shots. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, along with Roby Brock. I'm Chris May. We have three of the Democratic candidates for Arkansas governor with us tonight. Russ Russell, Dr. Anthony Bland, and Dr. Chris Jones answering our questions about education in Arkansas. And we shift our focus now to K through 12 education in our state. Roby, why don't you start us off?
Well, I got to pull up my question here first, though. But I'm going to come to you first, Dr. Jones, on this. We got a viewer question about what would be your qualifications for an education commissioner in Arkansas? That would be a big appointment that you would get to make if you're governor. So tell me what type of person you would be looking for to be the Hutchinson administration's version of Johnny Key.
Well, thank you for the question. And when I think about key positions like education and who should be the leader, there are certain values that I fall back on. And one is you want someone who understands the systems, which means they should have lived in the systems. So I think if I'm picking an energy secretary, I want somebody who's been in the energy industry. If I'm picking an educator, someone to lead the education sector, they should have spent time in the education sector. The other part of it is they're sort of the non-tangibles. How do they engage others? We can't know everything. So I would want a leader who is willing to engage the entire spectrum, particularly those who are most impacted by the decisions. And far too often we have small tables of individuals making decisions for everyone else, and they're not impacted by those decisions. So I would pick an education leader who has the qualifications in education and who has the empathy and understanding to bring a table together of those who are most impacted by the decisions.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Russell, same question to you.
Well, a little tongue-in-cheek, but Dr. Bland, someone who has experience on the ground as an educator and has seen the problems. I mean, that's when you get into the qualifications for education secretary. You want someone who's got experience in education and is on top of pedagogy and aware of what's going on the ground in the state with the education, with what's happening in the classroom. So, I mean, yeah, ideally, if he's not, who's serving under, then it would be a prime candidate for, or would be a fine example for who would be in that position, someone that's knowledgeable.
All right, so. Dr. Bland, this is your chance to appoint Russell
Return the favor.
If you're
Right.
governor.
Well, hey, thank you, Russ. Thank you. I appreciate that. But yes, I honestly feel like a person that serves in that position should understand education and from the every student level, from the students that are in low-income families to students that are well off. Their families are pretty well off. They can afford some of the finer things in life. So an education secretary needs to be flexible. Not only that, experience, certification, also a degree in education. Someone that will listen to the educators, that when educators speak, they don't speak to a deaf ear, where people are actually throwing them under the bus rather than listening to them. There's been many situations where our teachers were not heard. They rallied together and they were thrown under the bus because they were trying to express their constitutional right and actually be heard. And that's not right. If we have a constitution that we're supposed to uphold in our state and in our country, that's the only way that we're going to be able to continue the path of success that we have started way back when our forefathers wrote the Constitution. But if we're going to go against the Constitution, that's when you have all of those legislators that decide they want to do amendments that benefit their friends and family to get what they need to get. And yes, everybody that knows me, I'm going to continue to speak against people that are not for the people of our state and our communities. And I don't agree with a lot of these leaders that are hurting our children, our educators, our communities, our families, our mothers, our fathers, our churches, everything that we hold dear. They're not holding them up like they were supposed to be when they voted for them. And so to me, I believe the Secretary of Education should know who and what they serve and do just that.
Okay. The three of you are looking to succeed a governor who, by the time he leaves office, will have spent 8 years promoting and investing in computer sciences in Arkansas schools. What is the lasting imprint that you would hope to leave on education in Arkansas as governor? Mr. Russell?
I would have to say, honestly, civic engagement. In a lot of the outreach that we've been doing, whether it be, our rallies that we had before COVID picked back up, things like that, or just the interaction that I've had at meetings with other people, voter education has been core to it because we have so many people that have been left behind by the reduction of civics courses, and they're so disenfranchised and disaffected, removed from the entire process that they feel they don't have a voice. So that's what I was talking about when I was saying the civic empowerment type of fundamental issue with education is giving them back that power, giving them the ability to know that their voice can be heard and does make a difference. You look at the voter turnout in our state, it's right there along with our education numbers. It's abysmal. I don't think that's coincidence. I do think that, we hear a lot of people make a comment a lot of times that we're a deeply red state. We're not. We're deeply apathetic. We have a defeatist attitude in many ways that I'm hoping to reach out to those who have sat on the fences in other elections and get them back out there by making them know their voices are heard and do matter. And so by re-engaging in that process in our schools at every level, as well as just within the community as a whole, changing that fundamental metric so that we are working as a community again and building a better education and a better society as a whole.
Dr. Bland, what would you want to be your signature achievement in education?
I would say being able to meet our students where they are. So developing programs for students that need support in various areas, from behavior support, students that cannot function effectively in the general population, but yet they need that one-on-one support. I feel like we need more programs to actually support those students. I agree that no child there's not a child out there that cannot be reached. And the only way we can do that is to meet them where they are. So that would be my legacy, is to make sure every student or every educated person in our state will have the best education possible and have all of the opportunities possible to be successful, to have a career and when I say career, it not necessarily mean they go off to college. They might want to go to a trade school, do something different than getting a collegiate education. That's fine. I just feel like the legacy needs to be left that they have all types of opportunities to be successful, despite of the path that they choose. But the only way we can do that is to meet them where they are and give them the opportunity to be successful.
And Dr. Jones, where would you focus your time and energy in education?
So, Chris, I'm a systems guy. And when I think about the educational system, and I think about what I would want to leave behind, I really want us to make significant progress overall in our educational quality for every school across the state. And I see that playing out in a few different ways, and I would measure it in a few different ways. One, universal pre-K across the entire state. Two, every third grader reading at grade level. Three, every student graduating with a plan of higher education, trade school, or a clear path to a career with a living wage job. And there are things that we would do to do that. And one is we have to focus on infrastructure. We need the infrastructure across the state. Broadband is key. Digital literacy is key. The other is addressing some of the non-tangible issues like our social emotional concerns. And there's a core thing that I also heard when I spoke with teachers recently, and that is this sense of trust. And as we make progress, we have to make sure that there's a trust between teachers and principals, between schools and families, between students and teachers. So there is this sense of a lack of trust that's going on that would have to be improved in order to move us from the bottom 5 to the top 5. And I think we can do that. And the last thing I'll say is that, as a scientist, I get excited about coding. And I think the governor did a great job of laying the foundation. And as we think about how we move from the bottom 5 to the top 5 and prepare our students for what's around the corner for the future, absolutely we will build on the coding initiative and take it to the next step. How do you apply coding to jobs? Visited an Amazon plant just the other day. There are going to be thousands of jobs there that require you to have advanced level thinking and analysis. So we would certainly lay the groundwork for that to happen, again, to move us to the top 5.
You mentioned universal pre-K. Whenever someone brings that up, people always ask about the cost. Yeah. How would you fund universal pre-K, especially when you're having to work with a Republican legislature in Arkansas?
When I think about the funding of universal pre-K, what comes to mind is how can we afford not to fund it? When there was a recent study done that showed that if we provided universal pre-K for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, it would provide almost $400 million of economic activity a year. We also know that students who have been in pre-K are more likely to read by the 3rd grade, and they're less likely to go to prison. We are spending money on prisons, and we could be spending money on pre-K. So I would certainly push for it.
Okay. Thoughts on universal pre-K and funding it from either of you?
Any funding that we could get would, I say it comes from an economic structure. See, my doctor is in business, and so in my mindset, if you want to build up your economic structure, it's called building relationships. When you're constantly tearing down relationships with various economic entities throughout the state that are moving from our state to go to other states and build up their economy, we have a problem. So continuous relationships with economic entities and economic opportunities to build up the funding for our state will then pour back into our education system, our roadways, our salaries to our various entities such as our police officers, our teachers, our fire department, if we build that economic structure. But if we're constantly tearing down our economy and destroying the relationships we have with the various business owners, from small business to corporate giants, if we continuously destroy those relationships and they no longer want to have a relationship with Arkansas, we are basically destroying our state. So I feel like by just actually continually building those economic relationships across from right here in the state to in our country, and bringing more funding to our state to build up the economy so that we can pay for it. I don't want to take they're always saying we don't have money for this and we don't have money for that. Fine, let's create some money. And the way to do that is to bring the money into our state. If we constantly sending money away, we will never get where we need to be.
We have $1 billion surplus right now, but anyhow, go ahead. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, but go ahead.
Exactly what was on my mind. We do. We have $1 billion surplus. For what reason? That's the thing. I fired that shot a while back. No, it is. And aside from the excess that we're seeing right now, it goes back to what Dr. Jones said. It's every study that you see, an investment in education results in a net gain in economics. It's inevitable, not only a personal level, but on a national, on a larger scale. And there's also, and this may ring true, it's something that I learned a long time ago, is there's two fundamental ways of looking at education as far as in the pre-K to 12 area. You can look at it as you are raising children, or you can look at it as you are preparing future adults. And by implementing pre-K, by putting the investment back in the schools where it needs to be, you are, from the get-go, building the empathy, the critical thinking ability, and exposure to diversity that we as humans need to thrive and prosper as a society, both individually and collectively.
It's your question. I didn't mean to step on it.
Oh,
there.
no, you're good.
Dr. Jones had something he wanted to add to it there.
Yeah, I just want to add, the thing about budgets, there's an old saying that says, if you show me your budget, I'll tell you your values. Budgets are value statements. So if we value our future and if we value our youth, then we will certainly make the investments in it.
I'm so glad that you brought budget up, because that was going to be my next question. And I'm coming to Dr. Bland first on this, and then to you, Dr. Jones, and to Mr. Russell. There is the suggestion, our GOP candidate for governor that was here earlier this week talked about a constitutional amendment to eliminate the income tax in Arkansas. That would cut 50% of state revenue, about $3 billion out of a little over $6 billion budget, of which 70% of that budget goes to education. What would be your position on that constitutional amendment? Would you campaign against that? I'm sensing from your other statements about the budget there. Would you campaign for or against that? And let's just start with your thoughts on that proposal and whether or not you would, how would you handle that on the campaign trail?
Well, first and foremost, I would definitely not raise taxes, but I believe in building up what I said earlier, the economic structure. So bringing in funds into our state rather than trying to, once again, harm our state is the way we should go. The path.
Some people would argue that are you harming the state by giving them an income tax cut or by eliminating the income tax?
But then you just said it. If 70% of it is going to education, who are we harming? That it's almost like, once again, I have a very, very big problem with politicians that show one person this hand and hide this hand. I cannot agree with that. If it's going to harm our teachers, our police officers, our students in school, our educational, public education system, where we're now not even using all of the facilities that we have in our state for education. There are several buildings around here that are empty that is not being utilized. So I do not agree with taking away something that will cause possibly more harm than help. So I definitely feel like there's other paths and opportunities to take rather than trying to go to take away the tax. And definitely I wouldn't say let's raise the tax, but I wouldn't want to take it away unless it's going to help other people as far as lowering the tax. Let's put it that way.
All right. Dr. Jones?
Yeah. It's a short-sighted proposal for a couple of reasons. One, to lock us into a situation without knowing the future is short-sighted. But more importantly, what are you going to cut? My mom's, as I mentioned, is an educator. And there were times, like, she would give the shirt off of her back to anyone. And there were times when she was preparing meals for her students out of her own pocket when we barely had a meal on our table ourselves. And so there are teachers all across the state that are already strapped. What do you cut? And when I think about a proposal that would eliminate such a large portion of the budget, what I'm seeing is fewer teachers, fewer police officers to keep our communities safe, fewer hospitals in rural areas to keep our communities healthy. And that, to me, is what would destroy our community as opposed to uplifting our communities. So I don't support it. I would advocate hard against it. And I think there are other ways to make sure that we're efficient and effective while also making sure that we're providing every opportunity for the citizens of Arkansas.
Mr. Russell?
First off, full respect to the English majors. I'm not going to question your math. Just get that out. But absolutely not. Not to take a dig, but I don't think it was coincidental that the plan that Ms. Rutledge announced the other night was incremental over an 8-year period, which would be her ideal 2-term, which would leave someone else with the crisis to put up with that had been created by that implementation. It's just like the gentleman said, you do find out where your values lie based on where your spending is. And if you're going to eliminate that, you're either going to have a deficit and things are going to suffer, or you're going to make that up somewhere else. Now, generally, and in the states that were cited, you see a commensurate increase in property taxes. So, like you were talking about, show one hand, play the other. It's, hey, we're going to lower your income tax. We're going to make it up on your property taxes. You're still going to be paying out of pocket. I'd rather be dealing with a politician that just dealt with you straight and said, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do with the money. Here's your accountability. Here's your transparency. And let's get more value for our dollar. If we're spending 70% of our state budget on education, I know the other night y'all mentioned the facilities and the buildings on campuses. The latest report is showing that over 50% of them have reached beyond their half-life expectancy of about 30 years. 50% of the facilities in the state exceed that. A 15% metric is supposed to send up a red flag on it. That means that we have students coming out of high schools in science curriculum who, when they get to a college, it's a step down because the university doesn't always have the appropriate equipment or the facilities to continue the education they started with. What kind of sense does that make? You have to reprioritize from the bottom up.
He's ready to go on to higher education.
Oh, well, that's
out,
coming.
So,
That's coming. We'll get there. We got a lot of time to go. I want to ask the three of you about critical race theory. The idea that racism is not just about individual bias or prejudice, but that it's something embedded in all aspects of American society. Critics say that teaching this in classrooms puts students into groups, the oppressed and the oppressors. And there are a lot of people in Arkansas who say they don't want to see this in classrooms. As governor, would you support the teaching of critical race theory in our classrooms? If so, what would that look like? And if not, why not? And Dr. Jones, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Chris. You know, I chuckle because it's a boogeyman that doesn't exist. You know, critical race theory is taught in advanced level law classes. I have a third grader. What they're teaching is the multiplication table. What they're teaching is how to think critically about the relationships with each other. Now, and the other thing I'll say is that I am a scientist, and so when I think about research, it is important to look back at the past and to understand what worked and didn't work, because that knowledge that I learned from the past will help me make better decisions to prepare me for the future. And as a Christian, as a person of faith, when I think about my faith, it is grounded because I've asked the tough questions of it. And so if my faith can't stand up to the tough questions, it's not a strong faith. I think our society, I think our state can handle the tough questions. It can handle the analysis, and that's what makes it better. And, you know, the last thing I'll say is my family has been here in the state for over 200 years. There were certainly times in that period that were not good, where the state made bad decisions. And even fast forward to the Little Rock Central High crisis. We know, the pictures show, that there were things that we did wrong. And the only way that we can fix those for the future is to understand them. But again, specifically critical race theory, it's a graduate level course. It's a boogeyman that folks are creating to divide us when we need to be united.
Okay, Mr. Russell?
It's a red herring blowing a dog whistle inside a straw man. It's blown out of proportion. I mean, I'd sit there and say, yeah, teach it in pre-K. How are you going to make it palatable? You are talking about an upper division course in law school. But critical race theory as it applies to our everyday lives, I mean, we live it. It's one of the things that our language has kind of failed at, is differentiating between the dog whistle of racism versus prejudice. Everyone has inherent prejudices. That is a part of a human nature. The prejudice is something that you grow and overcome over time. The prejudices is what led to racism as a systemic issue, and that's what critical race theory examines and looks at to see what we can overcome and what we can better, how we can improve our society to equal the playing field, to level, to improve from our past. So that's where it is important to look. You find where you're trying to ban the 1619 Project and things like that. That is straight up revisionist history. That is simply taking it, that may as well be burning books. That is 100% controlling knowledge that people should have, where history is not always going to be comfortable. If history is comfortable, you're probably not studying it correctly, because you can't learn from it. You learn from that discomfort that it doesn't necessarily mean that you carry the burden of, call it the white man's burden, whatever you want to do, whatever the term you want to use for it is. It doesn't mean that you carry that shame with you, but it does mean that you recognize that there were wrongs done in the past that you have to avoid moving forward. That's where it's critical. That's where it comes in and has to be implemented. But again, as an entity into and unto itself, it's a catchphrase and a buzzword that's just been blown out of proportion.
Okay, Dr. Blaine?
All right. Well, hey, I agree with my colleagues here. I would support it because we never know where we need to go unless we know where we came from. And to hide history should never be a subject to ever be placed on the table. It happened. Deal with it. History happened. Why are you afraid to face history head on? Just make sure that when you learn history, you don't make the same mistakes again. We should get to the point that we don't see anger and frustration when we see color. But I get it. We're not there yet. You see that everywhere. But we need to be on a path to get there. But if we're sitting there saying, no, we're going to hide the fact that it happened, that means that all you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on something that is actually a artery that's just going crazy, flowing with blood. And see, that's not what we need to do. We need to face history head on, teach our children so they can make the right choices to not repeat what happened in the past. But basically, for us to move on to success and a positive foundation for our communities.
If I may, real quick, it's one thing that did occur to me while you were speaking. Another indication is the unwillingness to broach those issues shows an inherent lack of trust towards our children and toward our educators to be able to broach those subjects and navigate them successfully. So to remove that is showing an inherent mistrust in our society among one another. We can't sit there and coddle constantly. There are going to be issues that are uncomfortable, but they happened. They must be dealt with. Otherwise, you are only going to repeat them. So.
And the reality is too, I taught high school for 1 year, so I'm by no means a long-term educator, but it was a tough year. And I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out my curriculum. And there were enough demands and things on me. And when I think about the struggle that teachers go through now, they don't need someone telling them what they can and can't do. We want teachers to teach truth and facts. Teach truth and facts. And we have to trust that they will develop curriculum that will build a society of Arkansans that are ready for the future.
1 year of teaching school, and he decided it'd be easier to be a NASA scientist
It's way
or run for governor. I mean, it's one of those two things.
Yes.
Can I
Good
get one more
choice.
question in before we go to the
Hop
break?
in here,
All right,
sure.
let's talk about one other important K through 12 issue here. It deals with teachers and education personnel. We are seeing some financial troubles with the employee health and life insurance plans that exist out there. They're significantly underfunded. There's a big debate going on right now. Should teachers and education personnel make up the difference in those plans by making a bigger contribution in there? Should the state come and help put those plans on more stable financial footing? Mr. Russell, you get to go first.
If it was an agreement that the state reached on their behalf, then it's an agreement that the state needs to honor. There's already far too much pressure put on our educators, not just in terms of base pay, but in terms of not being provided the correct tools for the classroom. I have friends who are educators who run free pantries out of their classrooms and take donations for children in need because they don't have the basic needs met. When my own daughter was going through high school here in the Little Rock school system, there was constantly teachers that we needed additional supplies for stuff, and we'd go and take out of our own pocket because otherwise that's coming directly out of the teacher. And they take up that slack and they make up the gap of their own accord and out of their own pocket because they believe in the children and because they want to do the job. But again, if we're going to sit there, and a bit off topic, but if we're going to sit there and call them essential employees like we did all through the crisis, I consider air essential. I consider water essential. That means I can't live without it. Then we need to treat them as essential. And that means respecting them and respecting the sacrifices that they make on a daily basis, not ask them to sacrifice yet more. So.
Dr. Bland, should the state make up the difference of that funding, or should teachers and employee personnel make up the difference?
Well, first and foremost, for us to be one of the lowest paying states there are in the country for educators, how are we going to legitimately ask for teachers to take from the 2 cents that they get to give up one of their pennies? So this is my question. I would never support having teachers pay more than what they already are. Once again, there are other paths, there are other avenues to get money to support the people that are critical to our state, to doctors and lawyers. They would never be doctors and lawyers without at one point in time going through an educator. So, and being that said, many of them have six-figure jobs, whereas teachers' starting salary is around $36,000. So you're telling me $100,000, $36,000. There's a big difference between the two. So I would definitely not support having teachers pay more money to do something when they're helping people make tons of money and they're not even being paid for it.
That's good. I just want to get you guys on the record. But there's a lot of teachers watching, so and other education personnel. Where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, I wouldn't make teachers do it. Teachers already have an enormous load and burden on them, and COVID only made that worse, and we're not out of COVID yet. So to ask them to reach deeper into their pockets to fill a gap is a disservice to those that we say we value. You know, it's interesting, there was a report by the Arkansas legislature that came out in 1921, 100 years ago. And it said that the quality of Arkansas education is poor. And one of the reasons was teacher pay. We've been dealing with this for 100 years. And we will deal with it for 100 more years unless we step up and do the right thing. So I think the state should fill the gap. I think we should support teachers. As was mentioned, when you look around at our neighboring states, we already have a teacher shortage. We already have a difficult time finding teachers in some of our more rural areas. And so to ask them to take on more of a burden is not going to help us attract more students. It's going to cause them, for valid reasons, to go other places. And I'll tell you, when I send my 3 girls to school, I want the best teachers. And I want to support the teachers in every way that I can, because I know that for the time that they're in school, those teachers are pouring into my kids nonstop. And they are helping them to become great citizens. And I also know that teachers pour it into me. So absolutely, we don't need to add additional burden on the teachers.
Since you talk about teachers' pay, let me bring up a report from a nonprofit called the New Teacher Project. They found that too many Arkansas students are being taught by teachers who are uncertified in the subject they're teaching, and that students of color were more likely to have uncertified teachers. And they specifically point to low pay as a reason for that happening. So my question is, should teachers in high-need districts be prioritized when it comes to pay raises? Would you do that as governor? I believe you're up here, Dr. Jones.
Dr. Bland.
Oh, Dr. Bland, I'm sorry.
Oh, all right. So do I believe, could you repeat the question? Because I want to make sure I answered.
Of course. So the question is, should teachers in high-need districts be prioritized when it comes to pay raises?
Actually, I believe that first and foremost, you need to look at the salary as a teacher, period, in the state. But yes, definitely, we need to also look at those teachers that are dealing with those issues in the low-income areas as well. But the low-income area teachers, for the amount they are getting paid, is having to be more than an educator. They're having to be mothers, they're having to be fathers, they're having to be nurses, doctors, they're having to be food service workers, feeding children that don't have food at home to eat, so they have to make sure they have something to eat when they come into the classroom. I mean, there are many things that teachers, many hats that teachers play and have to put on their head every day. So to answer your question, I believe that we need to first look at the state as a whole to pay our teachers what they're worth, from the lowest income to the highest. Our teachers we're not even on the spectrum across the country for when it comes to the pay of teachers. That's why we're losing teachers. They're moving to other states. And that's why you're having non-certified people teaching students, because the certified teachers are not finna work for pennies to do what they're asked to do. And then, heaven forbid, you get a situation where you're in a district or an education system where they put on their other duties as needed. So when that happens, all of a sudden this teacher, hey, playground work. Hey, you have to monitor the cafeteria. Hey, you have to go out there and watch cars as they come by. Hopefully it won't hit a child, so please stand in front of that car so that if it hits anybody, it hits you, not the child. I mean, these are things that teachers are having to deal with. And so, to be perfectly honest, pay is only one element out of so many things that teachers really need support on. So if anything, we need to look at the whole state, look at the state as a whole when it comes to the financial stability of our educators.
Okay. Dr. Jones, would you prioritize pay raises for teachers in struggling districts?
What I would do is prioritize whatever incentive is necessary to draw teachers into struggling districts. I believe that pay is one of the issues, but you know what? I think it's more important for us to listen to the teachers. And one of the things that we haven't done is actually listen to understand, is it pay? Is it the quality of the administrators that they're serving under? Maybe, maybe not. Is it the availability of housing and the affordability of housing? And I think there are a number of different tools and levers that can be pulled in order to address the situation. You know, I've seen examples of incentives for where cities would incentivize housing purchases, and they have public-private partnerships to do that. So absolutely, you know, if the driving factor is pay, which it is significantly important, that's what we want to address. But I do believe that by listening to teachers, we will find that there are other things that can be done as well to address the shortage, because at the end of the day, unless and until we get quality teachers across the entire state and we address the shortage, we will always lag behind. And we can't afford to lag behind. And when I think about how we attract business to our state, one of the big questions that businesses ask and individuals ask when they want to move in is, what's the educational system like? They're looking for high quality education. When we improve our educational system, then of course we will begin to attract more individuals from outside of Arkansas to come to Arkansas. And it is incumbent upon us from a moral perspective to make sure that we're providing the highest quality education to every student. So we'll use every lever as necessary.
Okay, Mr. Russell, we'll give you the last word in this segment.
I mean, absolutely on the pay, it's a simple law of supply and demand. If that's what you're in need of, then obviously you're going to have to offer some additional incentive. But again, it is a multifaceted approach. When you're dealing with human beings, you're not simply talking about pay, you're talking about quality of life, you're talking about economic freedom. So it's not always simply a matter of, well, here's more money. There's a limit at which that money no longer buys you what you need in life. You know, if you're in an environment that's untenable, if you're constantly under stress, constantly overburdened, other duties as assigned, as Dr. Bland pointed out, those things where the inherent contract that you enter into with them is being abused, and they as a human are then being abused. Their good nature and their goodwill and their desire to serve in that position is abused repeatedly, then yeah, you're going to lose people. And I'm really glad we brought up the point of listening and stuff, because that's one thing I'm really glad about with both gentlemen here tonight is I know that that's something that we've lacked in leadership is we have had a lot of them that love to talk. We need more that will shut up and listen. They have to engage in the discussions to find out what do the teachers need, what do the people need, what do the districts need. They have to actually talk and listen. That's core to it.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. We're going to take another break. We're back in just 90 seconds to discuss higher education in Arkansas, and we'll have more of your questions for the Democratic gubernatorial hopefuls next. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. We continue our Your Voice, Your Future town hall with three of the Democratic candidates for governor of Arkansas. We move forward now with a discussion of higher education in our state. And Roby, why don't you start us off once again?
I will, but I've lost my place as to who goes first this time around.
I believe Dr. Jones
I think
is
it
up.
will.
Yes.
So I think that's right as well. All right, there's been a lot of discussion at the federal level regarding free community college. It was a plank in Bernie Sanders' platform, and it's certainly something that a lot of Democrats support nationally here. Maybe even it's just the first 2 years of even university education being free. These would obviously have big price tags. There would have to be federal investment in it. There could be state investment as well. Where do you stand on the prospect of free college or free community college?
Yeah, Roby, when I think about higher ed, which is a broad spectrum. There are colleges, community colleges, trade schools, certification programs. I think back to there was a time when K-12 education was enough to prepare our workforce. And again, we're doing some good things in K-12 space, preparing kids through coding, and Anthony Owens' work is phenomenal. And that is what was considered sufficient, free, and public. I would certainly put on the table an examination of whether or not we can make two-year colleges free as well. Now, when I say put it on the table, it has to be in the context of other things that are priorities. And I think things like universal pre-K are things that really have to be strongly considered. So I wouldn't take it off the table. And to your point, I mean, there are a number of resources that are coming in, and there are partners on the ground that are doing work in this space that would help to alleviate the burden on the state. But again, what our goal would be to prepare the learners of Arkansas of all ages for the future of work. And we know that our typical K-12 education only provides the foundation. It doesn't fully prepare us for what the workforce will look like in the future.
All right, Mr. Russell.
It's odd. We don't have any problem with funding K through 12, but you start adding on 1 or 2 more years and suddenly people freak out. Again, any investment in education always nets total gains as a society. So I would absolutely, again, table the idea, let's have the discussion of it, look at that. But also something that sticks out, and I hate to jump back, but it's relevant, is you think back to the comment you made the other night was that only 30% of our 8th graders are reading at acceptable literacy level. Part of what we've run into as a society and within our education system is with the advent of standardized testing and that metric being used for so much, in order to meet those goals, you simply lower expectations to meet that metric. what that's resulted in is numerous friends of mine that are college professors having to do additional work to prepare incoming students in the higher education setting. So really, we need to better prepare our citizens as a whole to engage in society, to enter the workforce, whether they want to go to trade school, whether they want to go to higher education, whatever route they want to choose. They should all be equally viable, but we have to look at where the failings are in preparing them to make that leap from. And if that is a societal failing on our part, where we have made the decision that we want an educated populace and K through 12 is no longer fulfilling that role, then we have a responsibility to either address that failing through improving K-12 or extending the amount of time that we allot for education in life.
All right. Dr. Bland?
All right, well, first and foremost, I have a vision and a plan of action that I would love to see happen to build up our economy. Therefore, we could support the forgiveness of student loans. We could support paying for the preparation of our students to be more successful in their career paths. You have nurses, for instance, right now, we have nurses that are having to work around the clock because there have been a shortage of nurses. We're dealing with a pandemic. So my question, well, my path of action would be to find a way to build up our economy structure so that we can get funding into our state to pay for our students to get into college. Once again, that also builds up our communities, bringing more people into our state, which then builds up the population of our state.
But that's a chicken and an egg kind of argument there. I mean, what goes first? I mean, you're talking about building it up, but you can't build it up unless you've got more people in that workforce. You can't have more people in that workforce unless there's jobs for them there.
Absolutely. And I agree. It's a process. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight. So I'm not saying time I become governor, boom, I'm finna forgive all student loans. I'm finna make everything free. We have to make sure that it's possible, that the path is possible before we can do it. But because definitely, I'm not going to do anything to make it where it hurts us worse than help us.
So this wouldn't be a day one priority, is
Absolutely.
what you're saying. Okay,
Absolutely.
I got you. All right.
It is the cost of college that seems to go straight up every year and makes it impossible for a lot of Arkansas kids to attend. What could you do as governor to try to rein in those costs, reduce the burden on students and their families, and make college more of a legitimate and realistic opportunity for these kids?
Well, one, back to the point I was making before, is that if you have students who are better prepared for college, then they can actually access it and complete it in a more timely manner, meaning they're not going into debt as much if they're required to get student loans and take out debt in that way. If we are funding it, then we are funding it on a shorter period because we don't have to go into as much debt to actually cover that cost. And also that removes the burden of the cost from the higher education institutions themselves, because then they're not dealing with adjunct and associate and all these other professors that are temporary positions that have less job security and end up with poor performance because of anxiety and other issues because there's no job security for them. So it's a multifaceted problem, as most of the things we're talking about here. I mean, when he was saying it's not a day one solution on his, there are no day one solutions because everything is interactive with each other. Everything is multifaceted and it requires that overall view. We have to look at how they're related to one another to solve them, solve one to solve for the other. So it is a chicken and egg, but we have to at some point determine which came first and start from there and then deal with the next step and then move on from there. And we need people willing to take that step.
Dr. Bland, the cost of college makes it out of reach for a lot of people.
Right. So once again, if you're dealing with trying to help people achieve their goals and success. For instance, when you're going to college, you have the work-study program. Many people are saying, hey, I don't want to take out student loans. Well, we're also having an issue with people in the workforce. So why not colleges build relationships with various businesses and companies across the city, across the state, to build up their work-study program so students can go to work and be able to pay for college. that's some of the issues that are going on, is that our students are not being supported to move from college to career. There's many students that go to college, get a degree, and do not utilize the degree that they spent thousands of dollars on, that they're now in debt for student loans. So I feel that instead of making our students that come into college go into debt, let's help them to find other avenues to be able to pay for college. That would also mean work-study programs, getting into the workforce. We have all this unemployment going on. Well, there are businesses that can say, hey, our doors are open, we're ready to pay you. We got tons of positions that, according to the current government, tons of positions that are open, and we need jobs filled. Okay, fine. We have students that need to work. We have students that want to work, that need to pay for college, that need to pay to get ahead. So let's open those doors and let's build those relationships with, for some reason, we're having such a trouble with doing, is building those relationships with our businesses and our communities. And I think that we need to end that and actually build that up.
Okay, Dr. Jones?
Yeah, Chris, there are really, the way I see it, two sides to the coin. You know, there's the cost, and then there's your ability to pay the cost. And I'll start with the ability to pay part. There are mechanisms that other states have put in place to help alleviate the pain of the cost of college, even Arkansas. So we have a 529 plan that, and I give hats off to the plan under the Asa Hutchinson administration that increased from $500 million to $1 billion. I think that's a plan where you can start early saving for the cost of higher ed, because the costs have been exploding over the last several decades. And I want to be clear, when I think about this post-secondary situation, I see it more than just higher ed in the sense of college. There, as I mentioned earlier, there are trade schools that we need to prepare students to go to. There are community colleges we need to prepare students to go to. In fact, when I was working at the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub, we created a program with Diamond State Vocational, where, in partnership with Pulaski Tech, where we trained students, 18 to 24, former students, 18 to 24, on how to get certification in roofing, welding, carpentry, and HVAC. And what we saw through that program was that students were either upskilling to get higher pay from their jobs, or getting new jobs, starting new businesses. So that there are programs that we can support that provide options to opportunity for our learners in the state. And I think those are the kinds of things that we have to do, in addition to trying to figure out ways to keep the cost of college down. But when I think about the broader landscape of it, there are far too many folks that are just left out of the conversation at all, because we focus so much on college as being the only pathway, as opposed to opening up multiple avenues for folks to go through.
I'll take the last question, since we're coming up on our hour and a half here. This one may be geared towards the chancellors that you would be working with if you were elected governor here. Right now, higher education in Arkansas, the funding formula is based off productivity. It's based on how successful they are at not only enrolling students, but graduating students. Dr. Bland, I'll come to you first on this. Would you change that funding formula that's based on productivity if you were elected governor? Would you want to see that funding formula for higher education have some sort of different elements to it?
Well, I would, when it comes to a formula, I would probably support a structure that is supporting the students at that institution. So if the students in that institution, just like I said earlier, were given the opportunity to not create debt, but be able to get a college education because they chose to go and work for their college education. That means they're going to class, they're going to work, making money to pay for their class. We're teaching them, we're training them. I believe in the old statement, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And if we're not doing that with our students, then we're setting them up for failure. So in this case, I believe the chancellors, at this point, I can't say what I would change unless I actually see the system at work and see what we can do to benefit the students that are going to these colleges and universities. I can't immediately say, yes, I want to change this, and it's not going to benefit the students. So it's kind of virtually hard to answer certain questions until you know how it's going to benefit or deter the people that it's actually dealing with.
The funding formula changed from enrollment to graduation over several years, and that was because there were a lot of colleges and universities that were getting people enrolled, but they weren't graduating them, and so they were still getting their money based on enrollment there. So it did change to productivity. Would you want to see some changes to how higher education is funded?
I would. And I think it requires, Roby, an examination of context. Right now we know that the context varies from college to college. You have colleges across the state that see different students. Those students bring with them different stories, and that changes the way that the university is able to do its job. So I think it's important to have a re-examination of the formula to ensure equity for all universities. But again, I want to be very clear. The focus definitely needs to be on higher ed in terms of colleges. It also needs to be on the broad range of other options so that we're able to support all students. And regardless of whether we're talking about higher ed or trade schools or the like, some schools have students that have English as a second language, and that brings a different burden, which may cause you to take a little bit longer. And those schools should not be penalized for things like that.
Mr. Russell, you get the last word on this topic.
Okay. I think you need to re-examine the formula, but not only looking at the formula, but looking at the metrics by which you're reaching your conclusions. If we're taking a look at, say for example, we're talking about we wanted better enrollment. So you lower the bar for what you actually require for an enrollment. You end up with students who are ill-prepared and not equipped to actually complete the program, so you end up with a lower retention rate. If you're trying to improve graduation rates and you lower the bar again, you end up with people graduating who are still ill-prepared. So by looking and changing the metric, and a lot of what's happened with the industrial organization or IO psychology field coming in and standardizing everything, and a byproduct of the John Dewey system of, learn what, where, when, but not necessarily why, you're coming out without a fully rounded education. You're not coming out with an actual, you need to look at a different metric. It's not how you performed on a test on one particular day at one particular hour. It's how did you take that knowledge, incorporate it into who you are, and what are you going to do with that and make yourself a productive member of society in the workforce, in society as a whole, and contribute what you have gleaned from that education. So I think we have to take that formula and actually look at what metrics are we using to measure that success.
Okay.
All right, these are the three men whose names you will see on the Democratic primary ballot for governor of Arkansas in May. Russ Russell, Dr. Anthony Bland, Dr. Chris Jones. You'll also see the name Supha Cypressith May. She was unable to join us tonight. She had committed to the town hall but had a scheduling conflict. But gentlemen, we're thankful all of you could be here as well. We hope to catch up with Supha at a time in the future. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you will vote in that primary on May 24th and when we decide Arkansas's next governor on November 8th. For Roby Brock, the entire Talk Business and Politics team, and all of us here at KATV, I'm Chris May. Good night.